Hey, it's Max. I'm going to be doing a really quick demo of how to use Hibernate, the super popular Java ORM library or object relational mapper. This is basically a tool that you might use to use Java code to interact with your database without needing to write SQL. So first off, I'm going to be creating a new project in IntelliJ. I'll create a Gradle Java project and I'll call it Hibernate Demo. I'm not going to be doing a whole lot of original work here. I actually found a great GitHub repo, which is very simplistic, even more simplistic than the official Hibernate tutorial if you find yourself trying to read about it there. There's really only two elements that are needed to define a database table and how to connect to it and interact with it. Those two elements, which we'll take a look at in a sec, are what's called an entity class, and the second is what's called a Hibernate config XML. So first things first, you can see that this file is located in the resources directory under source main. And so similarly, we're going to look at the raw version of this file and we're going to just copy paste this and create a new file in resources. We'll call it the exact same file name. It's important to match it, hibernate.cfg.xml. So let's hit enter and copy paste. So you'll note that in the contents of this file, there's a couple of things here. One is a session factory block, and in this session factory block is everything that is important. For example, one is how to connect to the database and what are some of the settings that should be configured for how we interact with the database. And the second is a list of mappings or maps between a Java class and a database table. So we're going to make this a simple one, even more simple than the GitHub repo we're mimicking. And we're going to create our own entity class. It's going to maybe be in a different package location, but no, not to worry. Stepping back a moment, something we haven't done yet is we have not added a Hibernate as a dependency of our Gradle project. So let's quickly go back to our build.gradle, which is in our project root. We'll add the dependency on Hibernate. So let's take a look at the version number that they're using. I'm sure this is a simple enough example, so if you're using a more recent version, that should work too. The other thing we'll need to add as a dependency is HSQLDB. This is an in-memory SQL database, which for our purposes will be adequate. In a subsequent video, instead of using HSQL as our in-memory relational database, we'll try out using maybe a more popular one like MySQL or Postgres or what have you. Than an in-memory database. So we have both Hibernate and HSQL declared as dependencies. You can verify that by looking in external libraries and scrolling down. See Hibernate pulls in a few things and HSQL. Great. So now the second thing we're needing to add is our own entity class. So we can pick any random one. Let's pick house. So house, the reason I picked that is because it's got the entity annotation. Let's look at the raw version of this file. We're going to copy paste it. We're going to put it in a let's call it com Max Mautner, and we'll call this just event. We're going to create a generic event object. So similarly, I'm going to paste this here, but we got our package information, and we're going to rename house to event. We'll organize our code. We don't need many-to-one relational mapping from our table to another table, so let's just keep it as is. The one thing I'm noticing, we can get rid of these getters and setters because that field doesn't exist anymore. We need to change our constructors. But otherwise, you can see we've got two fields here. One is private int ID, which is the primary key column of our table. Second's name. Let's change the author. I'll of course link to the author in episode details, so you guys can take a look at this nice guy's GitHub repo. But now that we've created this event, the next thing we're going to need to do is we're going to actually need to utilize this entity. So we'll make this our public static void main. And in order to utilize this entity class event is we're going to need to create what's called a session factory. At this point, we've created two events. And let's give this a try. Let's just run this. Verify that it works. We are probably going to have issues here because we haven't declared our mapping. Here we have our dialect. One thing I think we are not doing, we need to call .configure for clarity. Let's give this another shot. Connection refused. So maybe we're not running HSQL. One thing we can do instead is, instead of using HSQL, we can use H2. Another in-memory database. We'll verify that we have H2 now. So the key is that we're going to need to modify our connection driver class. So let's take a look at the config that they've got. So we're going to need to change the driver. In fact, great. Let's try running hello world again. See if it works. Compiling. Looks like it's running and looks like it worked. So it's logging the SQL. It created two events. I'm not sure what it's hanging on here. I know exactly what it's hanging on here. It's just that we're not closing the session. Maybe we need to similarly close the session factory as well. Let's give it more time. Cool. Yep, that was it. We needed to close out our connection or release our database connections. So now that we've created two events, let's try querying for them and demonstrating that they're in the database. Here we go. What does this return? Let's see what the return value is. Well, it's a list. I guess it's a list of events. see if that works. So we're doing two things here. One is we are creating 2 rows in our database table, and the second is we're querying for them and printing them out by looping over them. And let's give it a try. So there's some red logging, but that's not our issue. Here we are. These are our print statements. We can make it a little bit more explicit what we're printing in our print statements so that's more transparent. Right now, there's a lot of Hibernate logging and standard out that's occurring. We can actually cut down on that now that we've got things working by commenting out the show SQL true configuration and trying to rerun this. Still some logging, but you can see that the output is a little bit more minimal. At the very least, I just want to show the whole program we've written. First is our main method that we're bootstrapping or creating and obtaining a database connection is ultimately what we want. Then we are inserting 2 rows into the table corresponding to the event Java class. And lastly, we are querying that table for all its contents with no filters or anything and looping over the results and demonstrating that there are in fact 2 events in the table. Last but not least is that we need to release the database connection we have. Otherwise our program will hang forever. So that's our main method, pretty minimal. Revisiting our entity, you can see that pretty minimal. The key is that we have the columns of our table as field names. They've both got getter setters methods. We've got a couple of constructors. So three things. First was our main class. Second was our entity class. And third was our Hibernate config XML. So as we create more tables, we need to add lines in this XML corresponding to new entities that we want mapped. That's it. I hope it was helpful. If you've got questions, don't hesitate to drop them in the comments. Like, subscribe. I'll be back with another tutorial.